Welcome to the Cultist King podcast. I'm your host, the Duke, here with my henchman-in-chief, Bones.
Hello again.
And today we are doing 1956's World Without End. But first, Mr. Bones, what do we do here?
Well, when we get around to it, we talk about cult movies. Those movies that are off the beaten path, they really never got that mainstream appeal, and now they are simply spread by their cult fans.
And today we're going to spread World Without End. So this one, full disclosure, is a personal favorite of mine. It's kind of the movie I had in, mind when I was thinking when we were starting this channel. This was the kind of movie I wanted to talk about.
You weren't thinking psychological Japanese thrillers?
No, not really. It's been an interesting path. Let's say when we started with the giant claw, it's kind of where I intended to be. But anyway, so to go ahead and give you the plot of this one. So in this movie, there are 4 astronauts. And they go up into space, and where they're hit with a cosmic storm. Since their rocket is taken at a ridiculous speed, they undergo what's called the time dilation effect, and they return to Earth, but centuries have passed since when they initially left. So they're left with this new world, where on the surface is full of humans who, after years of background radiation, have been mutated into Cyclops cavemen mutants.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe
cool.
them. Yeah, they're pretty awesome.
Along with a few giant spiders.
Oh, yeah.
And underground is the rest of humanity. And while they're very smart, very peaceful, a combination of basically losing their nerve and 2 generations underground have rendered most of the men, what would be a good word for it?
Feeble.
Feeble, anemic. And
Pathetic.
Soy. Anyway, while the women are doing pretty all right. Very attractive. Lots of attractive women in this movie. So the men are trying to help their, new people, where they encounter both problems resulting from one particular member of that society and then also, the cavemen on the surface. I think that's the general gist.
Yeah,
at least for the premise. Will that get us started?
Yeah, I'll get us started.
So, this was made by Allied Artists. Despite the fact that this certainly is a B movie, and you can hear that the way it sounds, it's not a low tier B movie. The whole thing is that kind of trying to prove that they could put out a real movie. So, while this movie doesn't have like gobs of money, it is filmed in glorious Technicolor and Cinescope. And it has real actors in it and a real script. Honestly, I think this movie really, for me, punches above its weight class quite well.
Yeah, it definitely does punch above its weight class. It's not a brain-dead B movie. However, there are definitely moments where the maybe B-movie roots of the company sort of seep in. Like, you mentioned the giant spiders.
Right.
The giant spiders are in one scene, and if you take the whole movie, they almost feel out of place. The astronauts, they land on Earth and they're walking around looking for just whatever, and they end up in this cave, and then all of a sudden, the cheapest, fakest looking mutant spider thing attacks.
I thought they were terrifying.
I think I'd be scared if I saw one in real life, but due to the fact that, was it Rod Taylor?
Yes.
Yeah, Rod Taylor, who plays the character Herb, is holding on to it, shaking it around, like, ah!
Well, I'm going to give it this. So, yes, you heard this right. Rod Taylor's in this movie. He would go in, this isn't even the only time travel movie he would be in. He'd later go on to be in The Time Machine. But this was an early role for him. He was an Australian actor, so he's being asked to be in an American movie. He's not even one of the first 3 people listed on the poster, but he threw himself into this one. In fact, the director was impressed that he literally threw himself into this one, giving every little, ounce of acting he can to wrestling this rubber spider, and God bless him for it.
The scene almost reminded me of, I forget which Ed Wood movie it is, but the one where Bela Lugosi gets attacked by a giant octopus, and
I know what you're talking about. I don't know what it's called either.
it's like Bride of the Atom, or maybe it's Bride of the Monster. It's something like that. Or maybe it's neither one of
I
those.
think those are both movies, though.
Regardless, Bela Lugosi is in like a shallow pond, rolling around, like holding the tentacles and flailing them about. That's kind of what it reminded me of, except Rod Taylor's got a little bit more vigor in his terror.
Right, and luckily we don't spend too much time with it there.
Yeah.
You know, we got to put a monster in the movie, and then we
moved on.
We moved on. What I think, though, is interesting about this movie is the fact that it would go on to inspire, or if not inspire, at least it beat several movies that are much more well known to the punch. I mean, when I describe, an astronaut goes up, gets caught up in some sort of cosmic anomaly and comes back centuries later, the first movie you might think of is Planet of the Apes. But, I mean, that wouldn't come out till the 70s, so here we've beat it to the punch in the 50s.
And even better, this movie doesn't do what the remake of Planet of the Apes did, where the payoff, we find it's Earth and it's Abraham Lincoln. We don't get a caveman sitting in the Lincoln Memorial.
That would have actually been epic, though. Like, if they'd gone and they see it's Lincoln Memorial, but then, like, Lincoln has one eye and is wearing a loincloth. Like,
Actually, I changed my mind. You've sold me, Duke.
But no, that's... I would agree. The remakes were something else.
Yeah, it's not a big payoff that they are on Earth. I mean, it's a payoff early on, but that's not the point of the movie.
Right, and that's also why we're giving it to you so freely here, is that, that is, they established that early on. The movie isn't so much about finding where they are, and more it's in terms of exploring the way Earth is now, and where's man going to take his new place in it.
Yes.
The plot itself is interesting and original, in my mind, right?
Yeah.
I actually, despite it could have easily in a lesser movie been slow and boring, I thought it was interesting exploring the underground, society and their interactions with them, I liked it. In fact, I've shown this movie to a handful of people, some of which who would not normally be drawn to, hey, do you want to watch a 50s science fiction movie? And I think everybody's had a good time so far that I've showed it to.
For what, you mentioned Technicolor CinemaScope. It looks great, and although a lot of the sets are low budget, they aren't cheap looking. They're like minimalist.
Right.
But at the same time, they also have a futuristic look to them that I appreciate. It isn't bland, just white or gray.
Yeah, I don't know when sci-fi movies started to think the future just looked like everything would be painted white or off-white, and that would be
well, maybe
the
when
future.
All of our cars started being pumped out
when
white.
We started taking the fins off the cars.
Yeah, we started taking the fins off the cars, and then we started simplifying the colors.
Oh. And that's another reason I think I like sci-fi from especially the 50s, but even before the 50s, is the future looked like a cool place I wanted to be.
Even when there are Cyclops cavemen, like, trying to kill you, it's like, it's still cool, though.
Well, and here's another thing. So, like we said, this is not a dumb movie. It's also not a cerebral movie. And one of my favorite things is the whole, last 15 minutes is an awesome ride of they finally convince the people to get behind him and help them out. And they have him design basically a bazooka.
Mm-hmm.
And they're firing rockets at the cavemen and driving them back. And then one of the scientists has a, mano-a-mano fight with one of the cavemen leaders in order to free the other cavemen. And that's what I'm here for, man.
Yeah.
That's why I watch these kind of movies. So, you get to have your cake and eat it too.
So talking about...
I just want to say that I don't know why that's a saying, If I'm going to have my cake and not get to eat it, what was the point of having it?
Yeah.
That wasn't really worth interrupting you for. Continue.
Talking about the ending especially, fighting cavemen with a bazooka, that scratches two itches right there. For one, I feel like I've heard a lot of hypotheticals about going back in time with future technology.
Yeah. Yeah, what if we could just go back and terrorize, Paleolithic people with explosives?
What if George Washington had a Abrams tank? I think that would have really changed things.
And before you say, or before you feel that maybe the mutants here are getting the raw end of the deal, whenever they have children who are not mutates like them, they force them into slavery, okay?
Yeah,
These
they're
are
the bad
mutants or bad
guys.
people. If anybody deserved to be terrorized with bazookas, it's these fellows, all right?
Exactly. And second, the itch it scratches is I don't really have a name for this, but there's sometimes in movies where there's just something that's so cool that either gets teased and doesn't happen, or maybe you just imagine in your head. So at the end of Motel Hell, the fact that there's a chainsaw sword fight, or keeping up with the chainsaws, Evil Dead 2, the fact that the main character Ash has a chainsaw hand and he actually uses it. It's one of those things where it's just it's really cool seeing Rod Taylor with a bazooka shooting cavemen. It scratches that itch.
And Rod Taylor does a good job in here. In fact, this movie, because of its B-movie status, didn't get a lot of critical reviews, so I can't say it was like heavily panned or anything. There just weren't a lot of reviews for it. But one of the few reviews it did get called Rod Taylor one of the best pieces of beefcake in the genre.
Yeah, there's a scandalous scene where he's not wearing a shirt.
Well, and one thing I also thought was funny, though, is despite the fact that Rod Taylor would later go on to be in the Time Machine, this movie got into some legal trouble with H.G. Wells's estate, which, if you don't know who H.G. Wells is, he was the writer who wrote The Time Machine. He was long dead by the time of this movie, by the way. And honestly, I think, other than the fact that they travel in time and that you have an underground and above ground, I guess, I want to say, in my opinion, all of the connections to the Time Machine are fairly superficial in this movie. Especially if you actually watch it. As we're describing it, you might see some similarities, but it is not the same kind of story at all.
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a stretch.
And now I don't know if the lawsuit never went through, or if the Wells estate was just basically told by some judge, knock it off. But obviously this movie went on and was made and released and succeeded. So
yeah. So one more thing I would like to touch on is how relevant this movie feels.
Yeah, in a very strange way, this movie feels very relevant to today. And you want to start?
Yeah,
because I think we're on the same wavelength.
I didn't think this the first time I watched it, but the first time I watched it was a long time ago. But now seeing it, I'm like, man, this is really hitting home. The concept of everyone is living underground and is too scared to go above ground and actually take initiative to make things better. Like with below ground, it's everything's safe. We have everything we need. We have comfort. Everything is comfortable. Why would we leave our underground dwelling and deal with things that actually need to be dealt with?
Right, and then when these scientists showed up, and these are your pinnacle of the 50s, man. They're men of science, but they're also very strong, competent, and confident. In the 50s we had a very I don't know, I think we had just this cool ideal of a guy, who was virtuous, he was strong, and he was smart. You know what I mean? And they have to come here and they have to teach these people how to take back
how to be men again.
How to be men again. I also think it's interesting. At first, it was easy to write off well, of course the women are still pretty. Of course they're doing well down there. And I'm sure that makes for a more fun movie. But I have to say, as far as the lifestyle of the first world man goes, I think they're coping a lot less well. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
and I'm not saying this is a heavy-handed thing they were trying to say, or I don't want to take this too far, but it does kind of seem relevant.
Well, I'm sure they probably didn't even have any concept.
They had no clue what people would be doing.
The man-made horrors beyond their comprehension. But watching it, it's like, man, yeah, we do need to get out of our parents' basement and talk to people. And
maybe even go to the gym.
Or read a book.
Talk to a woman. If you're listening here right now and you're listening from a basement, you haven't talked to a woman, you need to watch this movie, but then you need to leave the basement after you finish this movie. But you should watch this movie first.
Yeah, you should definitely watch this movie.
Man. Even for the modern ideal man, there's still time for cult movies.
Exactly. Because they're about feeling good.
They're about feeling good. This movie, this makes me feel good. This is probably my 5th time watching it.
I definitely haven't watched it that many times, but I think this is probably the 3rd.
Well, without further ado, let's go into cast and crew here.
Yep, that works for me.
So, this, unlike some cult movies we do, since this is one of the B movies that's still a studio movie, it actually has actors in it.
Yes.
Which definitely helps it. Of the actors, Rod Taylor's probably easily the most famous, but all of them were in various things. I'm going to actually begin, though, with the director. Directed by Edward Burns. He did not only direct it, but he had made the story concept, and he went on to write the script for it. So he was very involved. His main start was Three Stooges films, of which he directed a whole lot of them. But he does have some cult overlap, because also in his filmography is Queen of Outer Space, Valley of the Dragons, and Return of the Fly. Though I have to admit, out of the 3 of those, I've only seen Return of the Fly so far. I do plan on watching those other 2, though, and they could easily appear on their own episode at some point.
And touching on something we've talked about previous episodes, he did direct a few of the East End Kid movies.
Yes, or the East Side Kids.
Oh, forgive me,
so,
East Side Kids.
If you're wondering what that is, go see our video on... what's that one with Bela Lugosi we did?
Ghost on the Loose.
Ghost on the Loose. Yes, go see that review. Also in this movie, our 4 scientists were made up of Hugh Marlowe, Rod Taylor, Christopher Dark, and Nelson Lay. Hugh Marlowe was in a variety of films, but the 2 that stood out to me was Castle of Evil and 13 Frightened Girls.
For me, it was Day the Earth Stood Still.
You know what? We talked about this. I don't know how I misplaced that one.
He was also in Earth versus the Flying Saucers, but it's okay if you maybe don't remember that.
You know what, though? That's still...
It's not bad.
Well, that's why we're working as a team here.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to know why 13 Frightened Girls stuck in my mind?
William Castle.
So, yeah, anything directed by William Castle immediately, sets off synapses in my brain. So Rod Taylor, obviously we mentioned, was in The Time Machine, but he was also in The Birds, was another huge role for him, and another very good movie. He was in tons of movies. In fact, he didn't really stop acting until the 2000s. The last thing I think he was in, or one of the last things, was he was actually in the modern Inglourious Bastards, where he played as Winston Churchill, interestingly enough.
Yes. He was also the voice of Pongo in 101 Dalmatians and in a movie called Dark of the Sun, which I believe has multiple titles. I think another title for it's called The Mercenaries. I haven't seen it, but it's got a cool poster, and I think there's a chainsaw fight, or at least somebody tries to kill somebody with a chainsaw. It looks cool.
Yeah, if you haven't gathered by this episode, we're a big fan of chainsaws and movies in this one.
Yeah, no.
We should do a series at some point on movies where chainsaws are significant.
Top 10 chainsaw movies, go.
Hey, we were trying to think of top 10 caveman movies. I think this one technically counts, even though they're mutants.
Yeah.
So, also in this movie was Christopher Dark, as I mentioned. Admittedly, I didn't know a lot of the movies he was in, but some of the ones that I saw were None But the Brave and Raiders of the Seven Seas.
Yeah, I mostly was flipping through his filmography. It's TV, and all of the television shows you could imagine from the time, like Gunsmoke and whatnot.
Yeah, a lot of these actors, just by virtue of the time and the fact that they worked so much, are going to show up in Westerns.
Yeah.
Because the Western for all of these during this time was still very much in vogue. The Last Scientist, Nelson Lay, he was in some movies that I have seen. Adventures of Sir Galahad and Gunfight at the OK Corral are 2 that I knew of. But much more important to you guys would be Creature with the Atom Brain.
He was also in, I don't know if this is any good, but it's got a funny name, Ma Barker's Killer Brood. And he has an uncredited role in Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Which we'll also... There's no way we're not going to cover that one.
And just... I don't know why I wrote it down, but I believe he's played Jesus twice as well as the Apostle Paul twice.
So, really, You know, all of the different kinds of movies a person can be in, he's been in.
Yeah, he's multi-talented.
Some of our ladies, Nancy Gates plays as the daughter of the leader of Timmick of our little underground enclave. Her character's name was Garnet. She was in a lot of war and western movies, including Comanche Station and Gunfight at Dodge City. And Dina...
Well, hold on.
Oh, you have something to add for Garnet here?
So, she was in 2 Great Gildersleeve movies. I don't know if there was more than 2. But, you know, as a Gildersleeve appreciator, we should let them know.
If you're wondering who the Great Gildersleeve is, so me and Bones had unusual childhoods, to say the least, in the sense that we grew up with the Radio Spirits catalog,
Yeah.
Which means that we have consumed a lot of old-time radio shows. And there used to be a very famous one called Fibber, McGee, and Molly that had a spin-off called The Great Gildersleeve. Honestly, if you like podcasts or if you have long commutes, you can find so many of those like radio shows just for free now on YouTube. You really have nothing to lose by giving them a shot.
Yes. And I don't have a clue about the quality of this movie or even what it's about, but Hitler's Children, which is like the coolest name for a movie ever.
So in my brain right now, I'm putting together a plot. And look, if any of you guys out there are aspiring filmmakers, you can use this, but you have to
credit us,
right?
Yeah.
All right, have you guys ever seen like Village of the Damned, right? So like the idea is that there's like all of these women become pregnant at the same time with children that turn out to be aliens, but they're all like kind of like, they're not identical, but they're very similar and all have psychic powers. What if we remade that, but they all come out and they've got little tramp mustaches and German accents, huh? We could call it Night of the Hitlers.
You literally just pitch it, you know. It's Boys from Brazil meets Village of the Damned.
I think we have something there. Okay, rant over. We're gonna go into Lisa Montel here. So she played Dina.
Yeah.
Her character actually is one of the mutants from the Above Ground who actually turned out normal and was cast out by her tribe. She was in a variety of films, and she's kind of interesting because a lot of times she'd play characters who are just like vaguely ethnic of some sort.
Exotic is
exotic.
The term.
That's probably the term they used. But 2 movies that struck me as probably being cult material are She Gods of Shark Reef and Daughter of the Sun God.
I wrote down those, and I wrote 10,000 Bedrooms. I don't know if it's any good, but it has a Dean Martin in it, so. But no, She Gods.
We love and respect Dino on this channel.
Yes.
We happen to be very highbrow and incredibly lowbrow on this channel at the same time.
But yeah, She Gods of Shark Reef is a movie. I haven't seen it, but I'm gonna guess that the name is probably cooler than the contents of the film.
That, unfortunately, is a real hazard of this line of,
Filmmaking,
research.
yeah.
Filmmaking. One of our antagonists, Maurice, he is one of the members of the underground society. He's like on the council. He's also a whiny snake and a bit of an incel.
He is a bit of an incel.
He likes Garnet. And of course, Garnet's going for the other guy, mostly because Maury's love language is being condescending and weak.
Yeah.
But he was in another time travel movie, The Time Travelers, 1976, which I've not mistaken. I believe there's an MST3K for that.
There is.
And he was also in the hit movie Them, which we also love on this channel.
Yeah, as an uncredited.
Actually, I think he was credited as reporter.
Oh.
So it was not a.
Well, he could have been a reporter who didn't get credited in the credits.
Oh, okay. Maybe he wasn't. The IMBD knew who he was.
Regardless,
but that is.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big part. And then the last actor I thought that we would mention is Timmick. He's kind of the leader of the Underground Fellows. And his name is Everett Glass, and he was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I feel like it's a movie everybody's heard of, but if you haven't watched it, it really is worth watching.
Oh, yeah, you need to see it.
I know that the 70s one got a lot of attention, and rightly so, but I don't think it overshadows the original in my book.
Yeah.
He was also in Flight to Mars, which another piece of trivia about this movie was large. Part of the reason they made this movie a sci-fi movie is because they wanted to reuse some of the footage they'd made for Flight to Mars, which they did.
Mind you, I think it was only maybe 30 seconds of footage.
Right,
so
and it wasn't out of place, so unless you just watched Flight to Mars, which I have admittedly never seen, then you wouldn't know better. But you do know better because you listened to the podcast.
I feel like you aren't really saving much money, or I don't feel like 30 seconds of footage should really influence the entirety of what kind of movie you're gonna make.
And though, for the life of me, I can't remember his exact role. He was also in a movie that I grew up with and have seen way more times than you might expect, 2 Weeks with Love, which I believe we've mentioned before on the podcast. We haven't done an episode on it, but I believe it's come up in a few people's filmographies.
He was also in The Thing from Another World, which
is another good one.
I've seen countless times.
Yeah, same here. That's another one that people know I don't know even if I call it a remake, because they were both different takes on the same story. But it's a movie that if you haven't seen, you should not overlook.
Yeah. There's
a reason that John Carpenter put it in Halloween and then later made his own take on the movie. It's just very good.
Yeah.
We should do that one too. We should just do all the movies. We should probably stop having such long run times before episodes if we're going to get to all these movies before we die. Sometimes I'm like, wow, we have like 30 episodes under our belt or something. Are we going to run out? And then I remember like, no, because every time we do one episode, we come up with 5 more movies that we haven't done.
Yes.
This is never going to end, guys.
I have one last guy, unless you...
I noticed one other person, but this is not an actor. One thing that was notable in here, and you may not be familiar with him unless you're, specifically into like pinup art, but set sketches for this were done by Alberto Vargas, and he was noted for being a notable like pinup artist, especially during like the World War II calendars and stuff. He kind of has a following. I want to say he was from Peru, but don't quote me on that. But this is his only film credit, so that's something I've also seen get brought up.
The person I wanted to bring up was William Foreman, and we mentioned radio shows. We know him because he is the voice of the Whistler, which I believe he's also the voice of the Whistler in the William Castle movie?
Right, I think there were a couple, and at least one of them was directed by William Castle.
Yeah, he was the voice in at least one of those movies, and I believe there was a television show as well where he did the voice for a period. He's not the only voice of the Whistler, but he's the one you, if you know.
One just very brief side tangent. If you actually listen to us about the radio show thing and you're like, I'm going to try one. If I could only get you to listen to one, The Whistler would be my pick. That's my favorite. Listen to hours of The Whistler, going to various places in my car. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and Foreman's not even, his role is like voice on radio or something. He's not in it. You don't see him. You just hear him for maybe a second, and that's it.
But it was a notable piece of trivia here.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't skimp on the trivia for you guys.
Woo your friends with bad trivia.
Woo your friends? Don't woo your friends.
Wow your friends.
Yes. Don't woo your friends. You can wow them, though. Anyway, I think that exhausts the trivia I have. Anything else you'd like to say about this movie?
I don't think I have a lot more to say about it, other than I think, as you put it, it's not a terribly cerebral film, but it's not a terribly stupid film either.
No.
It walks that line pretty well, and it's very entertaining. It's very nice to look at.
And it's well acted, I think.
It's just a solid 50s science fiction film, and I think a lot of times when we think about science fiction from the 50s, it's very easy to think of all of the crap that ends up on Mystery Science Theater.
Or this podcast.
And sometimes the ones that are good and not famous really slip under the radar.
No, and I think this one belongs more up there with, like, Forbidden Planet than down with, Earth versus the Spider.
Yeah.
In fact, and don't get me wrong, we love schlock here. Schlock is, it serves a purpose, but I don't think this movie's schlock. And I think you should watch it. That's my official opinion on it. And it's a great movie because I picked it. Now we're going to unfortunately let Bones pick a movie. What are we watching, Bones?
So, this isn't exactly, you mentioned, the types of things you thought you would be talking about on this podcast. But we gotta spice it up, and
you ruin this podcast. What are you gonna make me watch?
So, perfect segue from you talking about YouTubers making movies.
Oh,
I would like to talk about the Channel Awesome classic, really the magnum opus, Kick-Assia.
Wow, we're jumping the shark, and we haven't been here for a year.
Yeah, in a way, I'm pretty sure that movie came out in parts, so it's sort of like we're covering our first miniseries.
Well, if you, for some reason, enjoyed this episode about 50 sci-fi and now want to hear about a nostalgia critic movie, eat your heart out.
Hey, I will give a good case on that episode of why Kick-Assia is in fact a cult movie.
You know what? I can even kind of see your argument here. I'll probably enjoy watching it, but that's because I'm very stupid.
So, yeah.
If you want to hear about this nostalgia critic Channel Awesome classic Kick-Assia, please be sure to like, subscribe, and look for us on CastBox or wherever you enjoy your podcast.
And thank you for listening. Apologies for the massive amount of time between this episode and the last episode. You will not believe the scheduling and technical difficulties we have been going through.
Right. Between trying to keep up with Bones' schedule and the fact that this is our second time recording this, we are trying there. We haven't abandoned you guys. We still love you. You just sometimes we have to, go get some milk. We brought it back. It's whole milk.
It might be a little spoiled, but...
Okay, well, we better end this before this gets any dumber. So, have a wonderful evening.
Whatever time this may
Whatever
be.
time you're listening to this, and keep it cold.